40 for Raidable Crest Titans.
The latest round of the British Cross Country Championship would be something a little different from the norm, as the championship crews took part in the very first Yorkshire Hill Rally. And as well as the championship regulars, we'd also see a number of new faces taking to the hills and to the course this weekend. The first day of competition would consist of 4 stages, a relatively short day compared to what was to come, and a good way to get some miles under the belt for our crews. And fastest over the first day will be Richard and Mason Kershaw, taking an early lead of 8 seconds. That lead will be over this man, Johnny Drysdale, Tony Ray alongside. It was close all day, the pair swapping times throughout the opening day of competition. But for now, second place will be where they start day 2. For Simon Adams and Rita Tamalina, it will be third place at the end of the opening day. Out in the Loft House Freelander this weekend and lying second in the class as well. And this would be the first ever hill rally for Mike Faulkner and Peter Foy. But coming from a rallying background, this was the ideal mix between that old life and the new Comp Safari one. They settle in well, and although a small alternator issue was causing a few raised eyebrows, they'd end the day with 4th. Just behind them will be Mark Jacks and Adam Nicholson. They were just 6 seconds back in 5th place and would be happy enough with the start to the event, particularly with how close that leaderboard was. Carl Duffield and Martin Wellock take an early lead in Class 11 and a good overall position as well, the pair lying in 6th place overall after the day's 4 stages. Richard Watson and Paul Hughes were having a good day. It was 7th place for now, all very close on the leaderboard as you can see, and they actually ended the day on the same time overall as Duffield up ahead. Indeed, it was close throughout the top 10, with Stuart and Joshua Winter only a further second behind the crews up ahead of them as they end the day in 8th. The pace was good as well for Ian Gregg and Jason Noakes. They get a little lost on one of the stages though, ending up dropping some valuable time. They still lead the way in Class 4, but they end day 1 in 9th place overall and with a bit of ground to make up on the leaderboard. Rounding out the top 10 at the end of the day will be Jason Rowlands and Matthew Hall. They made a steady start to the day in order to make sure that they got through the event in one piece. They need the car for an AWDC event the weekend after this, but they'd be looking at increasing that pace a little more come day 2. Mark Thomas and Philip McKay lead the way in the bowlers at this stage in the event. Frustratingly, they dropped down the overall order a little into 16th now. The pair had been up in the top 10 in the previous stages through the afternoon. Phil Bayliss and Lance Murphy, meanwhile, come here aiming for a top 10 finish, and they end the opening day in 17th overall. They do lead Class 9, but if they wanted that top 10 position they came here for, they'd need to try and gain some ground on day 2. Mark Allard and Daniel Jones would be the Class 7 leaders in 22nd overall. They'd entered hill rallies in the early 90s, but after a good few years away from the sport, their recent return was seeing them putting in some good times. And in Class 3, it would be Henry Webster and Emery's Kirby who take the early lead. They were pushing the Discovery hard through the opening day's 4 stages, and it showed. It was a similar story inside the Range Rover for Adrian Eason Bassett and Brian Farmer. The pair lead the way in Class 2. Not everyone will be having the same amount of luck and fun inside the car. We lose John Marshall and Dave Hooper when they roll the car on stage 4 of the event, having to call it a day at the end of the first day of competition. So day 1 of the Yorkshire Hill Rally is complete, and the leaderboard is shaping up like this. Day 2 here in Yorkshire then, and a significantly longer day out there on the course. There wouldn't be any change to the lead though. Richard and Mason Kershaw continuing to hold an advantage at the top. as the crews reached the end of today's stages. They had their fair share of small issues, but nothing that would affect their times too much, and they take a 1 minute advantage by the time they reach the overnight halt.
Yeah, very trying day, but yeah, good result in the end. Had a fair share of problems, but I think we're doing all right.
Some early attrition here on day 2, though, when we lose Johnny Drysdale and Tony Ray. They'd only get as far as stage 10, and even then, it would only be the start of the stage. The car breaking off the start, and they drop out of the leaderboard after such a good start. That's so frustrating. And it would be a similar story as well for Paul Rowlands and Martin Cole. They'd started off steady on day 1, you might remember, but they picked up the pace and got themselves right up into the lead of the event, swapping that position with Kershaw stage by stage. It was getting exciting, but it wasn't to last. Fan issues would cause the car to go into limp mode, losing them 9 minutes and putting them right back down the order, and with an almost impossible task of getting back onto the podium.
Yeah, pretty good. We had the early lead, and then in stage 3, was it, Coley?
Yeah.
Stage 3, we had a fuse go in the fan. Lost 9 minutes. So
it's all a case of climbing up the leaderboard again tomorrow now?
Yeah, climbing. We're getting up there quietly, but we lost 9 minutes, so it's a lot to do, you know.
All of this drama, though, playing up ahead would also play into the hands of Simon Adams and Rita Tamalina. The pair had been in the podium positions to start with, so it wasn't such a big move, but that step up to second would be a welcomed one for the pair, and deserved as well. A full day to go, though, only 1 minute, the difference between a win and second place, so that victory was hardly out of reach.
Very, very rough, very long, very hard. We've just done over 200 miles. Just delighted to be back. First thing to do, I think, was to make sure I started on Sunday morning, and we've achieved that. So yeah, we're really happy.
Things were going much smoother on day 2 for Ian Gregg and Jason Noakes as well. They were loving the rough stages and climbed their way up as far as a podium position now. Of course, leading the way in Class 4 with that as well. And it was close as well. Just a single second between them and Adams now.
Absolutely loving it. Yeah, fantastic. With a little bit of problems in the second stage. I was just pushing a bit hard, and we're just struggling a bit on the arrows, but after that, yeah, absolutely fine. Yeah, loving it.
The attrition continues here on day 2, though, when we lose Mike Faulkner and Peter Foy. They'd been going well up until this point, with minimal issues to report as well, but the rear hub would have other ideas, failing on the car as they got into stage 10. They would actually finish the stage dragging the car through and not dropping too much time, believe it or not, but with a 20-mile road section back to service, there was no way the pair would be continuing from here. Jason Rowlands and Matthew Hall then were going the right way on the leaderboard now. A trouble-free run would see them leading the way in Class 5 and moving up to 4th overall. They still had one eye on a careful run this weekend to get to the finish with the car in one piece. But surely being this close to the podium was a bit of a red rag and was going to give them a bit of an urge to push on that final day of racing. And another crew moving the right way up the order would be Phil Bayliss and Lance Murphy. Their plans of finishing in a top 10 position now looking like being fulfilled if they could keep things going and keep their pace. They end the second day of racing in 5th place overall, still leading the way in Class 9 as well, with no issues to report for a change. This weekend would see the welcome return of the Simonite sisters, coming out of retirement for one last rally. Their words, not ours. And day 2 of the event was certainly going better for Stephanie Lee and Rachel Dilworth. Yesterday, the pair would struggle. The car cut out on the start line and would struggle to restart. But with some help and a bump start from fellow competitors, they eventually got the thing going. With no issues on day 2, they were able to get used to the car now and start to get that hammer down, climbing up the leaderboard to end the day 6th overall, 3rd in Class 8. Things have been going well, meanwhile, for Richard Watson and Paul Hughes, right up until the last stage of the day, that is, when they break a shaft. They managed to keep themselves in the top 10 with 7th overall, but they'd have some work to do both overnight in service and on day 3 to try and climb back up the order. Shafts, the story of the day for Mark Jacks and Adam Nicholson too. Theirs didn't break, just kept popping out and needed to be put back in. But aside from that minor irritation, my word, not theirs, and a little bit of navigation error at times, they would get to the end of day 2 in 8th place overall. A puncture would be just one of the issues facing Carl Duffield and Martin Wellock today. The car had also started to overheat a little, but they were still putting in some good times beside these issues and would end day 2 in 9th place overall, leading Class 11 still from that position. And rounding out the top 10 would be a familiar face to some of our viewers, perhaps just not the Comp Safari ones. It would be Kev Proctor and Mark Allison. Kev taking part in his first off-road event. He usually competes in stage rallying. The pair were enjoying themselves, even if they did comment that this wasn't a sport for old men. Kev's back was in pieces. A look again then at some of the class leaders, and it would still be Mark Thomas and Philip McKay who lead the way in the bowlers. They gained a little time back overall too, and were up to 12th place now. They did get a puncture, but were able to change it between stages and minimise the time lost. Mark Allard and Daniel Jones, meanwhile, were still leading the way in Class 7. Mark out-rallying with his son-in-law this season, and things were still going well for the pair. They end day 2 in 13th on the leaderboard. Henry Webster and Emery's Kirby were climbing the leaderboard, up to 16th on the overall standings now, and of course, still leading the way in Class 3 in the Discovery. We'd see a bit of change in Class 2 now as well. Alex Parpottas and Stephen Parker end the day with the lead in the class. This, a big change from the UTV that he'd driven before. Twice the weight for a start, but it was going well in that class lead and in 23rd overall. This was, though, a challenging course, so, as you might expect, we do lose a few more crews on day 2, one of those being Peter McCallum and Peter King. They retire when the gearbox gives up the ghost. We'd also lose George and Jacqueline Bryson. They'd been suffering with a bad vibration on the car, trying so many different things to cure it, all without any joy. They did also need some emergency welding to be done on a seat mount and on a wishbone, which was sorted by some of the Irish service crews in the service park offering their services for the pair. Sadly, the vibration would eventually be traced to something in the gearbox, the pair having to call it a day having come this far. Martin Cox and Stuart Delph started the event off badly. A broken ball joint off the start line of stage 1, and here on day 2 things weren't much better. The alternator belt snapping on the car, leaving them with very heavy steering to contend with in these rough stages. But they get the car back to service for some TLC ready for the final day of racing. And it had been a bit of a rough day for Ed Cobley and John Tomley to open things on day 1. They didn't even get to the finish of the first day, in fact. Injector issues causing them to stop. They will be back out on day 2, though, with some help from Richard Canterbury, who opened up his RCM off-road workshop specially to source the parts needed to get his fellow competitor out for day 2. 2 down, 1 to go then. Here's the end of day 2 with a few changes at the top of the leaderboard. And here's how things look going into the final day of competition here at the Yorkshire Hill Rally. Here we go then, day 3, the final day of competition here in the British Cross Country Championship at the Yorkshire Hill Rally. And the weather had plans to make things difficult for our crews. But before we have a look at the overall results and the class winners, let's just take a look at some of the other class finishers and how they got on this weekend. And for Steve Hill and James Bolland, it will be 3rd place in Class 10. Stuart and Joshua Winter could have been higher had the pair not had to miss some stages due to a broken front shaft on the first Driffield stage. And as if that wasn't bad enough, look, they'd go into the second pass of the stage and break a rear shaft. They do, though, end the event 2nd in Class 10. Not bad for damage limitation. In Class 11, it will be 2nd place in the class for Robert Patton and William Bones. They'd suffer with some power steering issues on day 2, as well as a broken windscreen, but they do manage to take that 2nd in class and 12th overall. After dropping down the order on day 2, it will be 3rd place in Class 2 for Adrian Eason Bassett and Brian Farmer. They'd have wanted to be higher, but it sadly wasn't to be this time around. And second in that class would be Chris Ratter and Kenny Clark. They finished a few places higher on the overall results, with 22nd overall as well in the Defender. In Class 3, it's Ashley Bartlett and Niall Banyard taking third in the class. Their event wasn't plain sailing by any stretch of the imagination, but they'd be happy enough to classify as finishers this weekend. Reese and Sean Mattison had stepped up to the modified production class for this season after their previous Freelander exploits, and it hadn't gone too well. They crashed on the Scottish Hill Rally. This weekend, though, was going much better for the pair. They take second place in Class 3, 25th overall. The car had previously belonged to John Pickering, in case you recognised it. He sadly passed away in 2022, and co-driver Sean was indeed the co-driver back then as well. Great to keep the memory going and the results coming as well. An emotional weekend, no doubt, for the pair. In 19th place on the overall leaderboard, it will be Simon Rood and Max Lamach. The pair doing enough to take second in Class 4 by the end of the event. And things had gone pretty well for Holly Wicklow and Joseph Peake. No issues for the pair. They take second in Class 5 this weekend, as well as 23rd overall in the Can-Am. Day 1 had seen a couple of issues for Dennis Ferry and Barney Gillespie, namely a broken rim. They felt that they must have hit the only rock on the entire route. But thankfully, they had a much better day 2 and 3 to get themselves through to the end of the event, with third in the bowlers. Second place in the bowlers will be Nathan Burrell and Matthew Kirby. They were 3 minutes ahead by the end of the event. A nice little comfort margin, but you can never completely back off, especially when the weather can change as drastically as it did this weekend. For Alex Day and Nick Beadle, it will be second in Class 9 to end the event. The pair taking 14th place on the overall results as well by the end of 3 days of gruelling competition here in Yorkshire. Back onto that overall leaderboard then, and things had been going well for Toby Jefferson and Neil Hartley. First time co-driving for Neil, and the pair were out this weekend looking to drive their own pace and get to the finish. Unfortunately, the throttle cable had other plans, and in the absence of a bootlace fix out on the stages, it would be game over for the pair. Pete Widdup and Marion Andrew had a pretty disastrous event, it was fair to say. Still, they had a good time out here on these stages nonetheless. They broke the gearbox on the car on the first stage of day 2. Once recovered, they'd have to head back up to the Discovery Centre to fit the old gearbox from 11 years ago, which involved fabricating whole new mounts as well as sourcing a new clutch as well. You get the idea. They got the car back to the event for 10:30 on Saturday evening, ready for day 3, which would thankfully go much better, including a fastest overall time. All that hard work and burning the midnight oil had been worth it. As soon as they finished, Marion had to quickly get on the road for the 5.5-hour drive to Portsmouth to catch the ferry back to France. And after their earlier problems, things had started to get on the up again for Paul Rowlands and Martin Cole. They'd climbed up as high as 10th on the leaderboard, but once the rain came, they'd have a small off into a hedge. That should have been all okay, but then the car slipped down the bank and into a drainage ditch onto its side, which unfortunately would signal game over for the pair. A weekend to forget. On to the top 10 then, and in 10th place overall were our Class 7 leaders Mark Allard and Daniel Jones. They'd led the class throughout the event. This, a great overall result for the pair as well. Mark Thomas and Philip McKay had managed to get themselves back into the top 10 leaderboard by the end of the Hill Rally. Not quite as high as where they were on day 1, but it was still a strong result. The pair taking victory in the bowlers with that as well. And this might have been Kev Proctor's first time out with Mark Allison, but it was an 8th place overall finish for the pair. They went well on this debut, managing to keep things going to put them inside the top 10 overall, as well as 3rd in the class. Would we see more from Proctor out here in Comp Safari? Time will tell. There's some late frustration though for Simon Adams and Rita Tamalina. They wouldn't be able to fight for victory on day 3, instead dropping down the results and into 7th. Not the end to the event that they'd had in their sights, of course, but they could take away the positives. They'd been fast enough to challenge for the podium positions when things were going well. Some more late attrition as well when we lose Stephanie Lee and Rachel Dilworth on day 3. The Simonites retiring on stage 14 after a fantastic run up until that point. Carl Duffield and Martin Wellock would go well through the final day though, managing some good pace, the pair ending the event Class 11 winners, as well as a 6th place overall finish. Things almost went from bad to worse though for Richard Watson and Paul Hughes. They put the car up on 2 wheels on Sunday morning, making a bit of a habit of that, doing the same thing at the previous round, you might remember. They get the car back onto its wheels though and continue to take the Class 10 victory and 5th place on the overall leaderboard by the end of the rally. Phil Bayliss and Lance Murfin said that they wanted a top 10 finish here this weekend, and you know what? They did exactly that, managing 4th by the end of the event, exceeding what they came here to do. But with Phil's dad paying the entry for them, there was no way they were coming here to make up the numbers or not make it to the finish for that matter. They take victory in Class 9 with that result as well. It had been a faultless drive though for Jason Rowlands and Matthew Hall. They take the Class 5 victory, getting themselves onto the podium of the event and of course keeping the car in one piece, ready for Jason's event the following weekend as well. A strong end to a grueling 3 days for the pair. The battle at the top then had been a close one through the final day of competition. Ian Gregg and Jason Noakes had been fighting hard and climbed up the order, taking the lead. Right up to the final stage, they looked set to take victory this weekend. But a slight engine management issue would cruelly drop them time and mean they have to settle for 2nd place at the end of the day, missing out by just a single second on the clock. So it was a fairly relieved Richard and Mason Kershaw, who perhaps had taken their lead for granted a little too much, slowing down, putting them in that fight-back position. They do, though, indeed give it a good fight back through the final stage, taking advantage of those issues for Greg as well to take the victory by that single second after 3 long days of competition. So with the clock stopped and the final stage of the event complete, here's a reminder of how close that overall fight for victory was here this weekend.
Richard, Mason, Yorkshire Hill Rally 2024 winners, first event up here. You must be happy.
Oh, very much so. It's been a great event. Proud to win the event, and it's been a good one. So, yes.
Real close battles throughout the days, and then obviously today with the rain coming in, it made it a little bit more interesting, let's say, for Ian in the buggy. Took a lot of time out of you in the long stage earlier this morning, but then you've managed to claw some back in the afternoon.
Yeah, I took it a bit too easy. We had quite a lead overnight and took it a bit too easy and didn't listen to Mason. He says, you're taking it too easy, and I thought, we'll be all right. We weren't.
Ian, Jason, 2nd overall here on the Yorkshire Hill Rally, just that 1 second away from the win. You must still be happy though.
Oh, we're very happy, yeah. Good event for the first one to run. Loved it, absolutely loved every minute of it. Even in the wet, yeah, superb.
Yeah, the buggy really came alive when the rain came down. We saw it's been dry most of the weekend, but this morning you really found that rhythm and really set those stages on fire.
Yes, and obviously we like it whenever it's wet and slippy because we can catch the very high speed stuff. Unfortunately, for the last 2 stages we had an engine management problem, which we think was down to something very, very simple. So one of those things, we could have fixed it, but we didn't realise that's what it was. So we'll be back.
Jason, Matt, fantastic finish for you. 3rd overall here on the Yorkshire Hill Rally. Must be pleased.
Yeah, it's been pretty good, and like the rain, the wet started coming, make it more harder and more slippery, and the slugging, and less days like driest. Yeah, good weekend. Thank you for all the team, Power Homes, and thank you for my dad, and Yeah, pretty good third place.
The inaugural Yorkshire Hill Rally then has been a great success. Positive feedback all round. So all that's left to say is we'll leave you with a few more highlights from this exciting event and hopefully see you again in 2025. Thank you for watching.
Care 40 for Rateable Crest Titans.